Thanks, Zach. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ken Fetcho, and I am OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. And I'm just really excited to kick off today's session here with Chris and Herb to hear how their organizations are using remote sensing to communicate restoration impact and really kind of describe how they're using this different technology to help inform future on-the-ground work and communicate with their constituents, their organizations, and the partners that they're working with. And so I reached out to Chris and Herb to encourage them to, really partner as a watershed council on SWCD, which is sort of what Connect is all about, to share what they're working on for a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, the Gillum SWCD and Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, they're doing just great work. And I think all of you will be interested in it today. And clearly, there's a lot of you guys here in the room. And secondly, I think they've fully embraced using a variety of remote sensing technologies, utilizing OWEB funding, a variety of OWEB funding, but also funding from other organizations to meet their goals and objectives. And I think it's important for them to talk about sort of their successes and challenges. And finally, by facilitating this talk, it's helping OWEB implement some core activities in our strategic plan that was refreshed in 2024. And so I've been working with my OWEB colleagues to implement Strategic Priority 4, where we're working to advance learning about watershed protection and restoration effectiveness through coordinated monitoring. And there's six priorities in our refreshed strategic plan, and I'm sort of, coordinated monitoring clearly falls in my wheelhouse. And one core activity under this priority is to create and promote opportunities to convene monitoring grantees to share, discuss, and learn about common monitoring successes and challenges. And so my colleague Audrey Hatch and I, we're constantly trying to figure out, how best to do this, how to engage with our grantees and agency partners to share information, to promote existing tools and best practices to advance learning about restoration effectiveness. And obviously, Connect is just an ideal opportunity to do that because you guys love to come here and learn about what others are doing to apply that to your work. So it's sort of like an easy win for us to sort of encourage Chris and Herb to talk about these things and have you guys sort of absorb it and apply it to your work. And another thing that we'll be trying later this year to pilot sort of this learning opportunities amongst our grantees is we'll be convening our monitoring grantees in virtual meetings to improve communication and learning across the different organizations that are performing monitoring with OWEB funds, with the intent to create a network of monitoring practitioners to share information with each other and promote their successes and challenges. What are sort of the existing tools that they're using so that other organizations can benefit from what they've learned or what didn't work well from them to help each organization meet their restoration and monitoring goals and objectives. And so I'm really interested in hearing from you guys if you have additional ideas on how to convene our grantees and agency partners to share those common successes and challenges. And so we'll have time at the end of this session for questions for Herb and Chris after their talks, but also feel free to offer some of those suggestions for any ideas on how we can convene our grantees and agency partners to learn from each other outside of Connect. And so I'll be here for the rest of the conference. So feel free to grab me. I'll be at the reception and the dinner tonight, so happy to chat. And then also, if you're interested in learning more about OWEB strategic plan, there's this QR code. You can snap a photo of that with your camera. And also, there's my contact information listed at the slide. So feel free to reach out to me anytime. And so now what I'd like to do is kick it over to Chris for his first talk. So Chris Knight is the executive director at the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, and he'll be sharing with us how they're utilizing drone imagery to really understand sort of the impacts of restoration and help inform future on-the-ground work in Whitechoose Creek. So I'm gonna close my slides and pull his up really quick, and I just lost the cursor. So that should be ready to go, Chris.
Thank you, Ken. All right, good morning. Like Ken said, my name is Chris Knight. I'm the Executive Director at the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council. We're based out of Bend, but we cover an area that's south of Lapine in the headwaters of the Deschutes all the way to Lake Billy Chinook near Madras, Oregon. But thanks to Ken for encouraging us to put this talk together. OWEB's one of our major funders and a huge supporter of our monitoring work. So appreciate that, of course. And so, like Ken said, today, part of my talk is, of course, going to be about how we're using drones and just trying to give an example of how we use drones in different ways for some of our work at White Shoes Creek. But it's also a chance for me to tell some of the story about some of the restoration that's happening and how we're, just show some images of, resilience to some of our restoration after fires and floods that we've had in the last year or so. So I'm going to be talking about work that we've done in White Shoes Creek, restoration work that our watershed council has led, but of course that's done with a whole suite of partners and funders. I've got a slide at the end that recognizes all the different funders and partners. But White Shoes Creek, if you're not familiar with it, it flows off the Three Sisters Mountains in the Cascade Range, flows down through the community of Sisters, Oregon, and then flows on out and meets the Deschutes River around the Crooked River Ranch, Terrebonne area, if you're familiar with that part of the state. And then, of course, the Deschutes flows on out to the Columbia River. I'm going to be talking mostly about this area in red that we call White Shoes Canyon. It's a 6-mile reach of White Shoes Creek. The lower 3 miles, we've now restored that stretch of White Shoes Canyon, but the upper 3 miles, we have plans to be restoring that in the coming years. We've got some funding to start technical design work for that restoration. But that 6-mile stretch is owned by one of our close partners, the Deschutes Land Trust. So we're lucky to partner with them in this restoration work. And I should back up and just say, the impetus for this work is for reintroduction of salmon and steelhead. And so White Shoes flows out to the Deschutes. I said there's a series of dams, the Pelton Round Butte dams near Madras, Oregon, were built in the mid-1900s that effectively cut off migration of salmon and steelhead. Then in the early 2000s, a reintroduction effort was started by Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and Portland General Electric. And so we're doing all this restoration for the reintroduction and bringing those salmon and steelhead back to this part of our watershed. So just some context, this is the type of restoration we're doing at White Shoes Creek. And part of the reason we've done so much monitoring is we're utilizing a new type of restoration, a newer type of restoration known as Stage 0 restoration. And so that's just kind of a technical, funny name associated with the stages of something called the channel evolution model. But essentially, what we're trying to do is just restore this area back to as natural conditions as possible, where water is connected across the floodplain and can spread out across the bottom of the valley. This is a series of photos from one of our first phases of this restoration. So that top photo is pre-restoration. White Shoes Creek was shoved over, pushed, it was straightened, it was channelized, pushed over to one side of the valley. And so we've got an area, that entire grassy pasture area is disconnected from the creek. The creek is in size several, 5 to 8 feet down in its channel. Second photo is immediately after restoration in 2016. You can see we've gone in, placed wood, we've filled the channel, we've let water spread out and reconnect with the floodplain. And then the last photo there is several years post-restoration of that first phase. So this is kind of the context for, the monitoring work we're doing. And so, what I'm going to share here is I'm going to shift now to talking about how we're using drones to talk about this work and talk about the effectiveness of the work and just tell stories about the work. So this is a video we took, one of our contractors took via drone, just pretty much immediately after we completed our latest phase of restoration at White Shoes Canyon in 2023. And so we've used this video in presentations just to help share the sheer scale of the restoration. This is our largest phase of work we've done to date. It's 1.5 miles of White Shoes Canyon that was restored in one summer season, where the pre-restoration, it was in that single thread channel that had been straightened and channelized, and the area covered by water was just 9 acres, whereas post-restoration, the wetted area is approximately 60 acres across the bottom of the valley. Um, I like to share with folks that, this style of restoration is not the type that could be done everywhere. If you had infrastructure that you were trying to protect, if you had working lands, grazing lands, crop lands that you were wanting to keep in production and keep productive, you wouldn't necessarily use this style of restoration. But because this property was purchased, in part with public funding, with OWEB dollars, by a land trust to manage as a nature preserve, we are trying to maximize the ecological uplift that we can achieve in White Shoes Canyon. And because of the importance, we know steelhead and salmon are returning to this part of White Shoes Creek where we've got low gradient and this big floodplain where the water can spread out. So we're trying to maximize the habitat we can create for these fish coming back. So this video just gives you a sense of the scale. Like you see the amount of wood we're putting in the floodplain, right? It's 4,000 trees that we've harvested around the Sisters community for wildfire risk reduction work with private property owners, with homeowners, with communities around the city, and then and in some cases just properties adjacent to this White Shoes Canyon. We were finding these sources of trees. And I just wanted to reiterate, this video was taken in November, immediately after restoration was done in July and August. So there hasn't been a growing season. So it's really in a very raw state where the vegetation we planted, the seeding, all that vegetation has not come back yet. And so I've got some other photos that'll show some of that. One way we've used drones also is to create, immediately after the restoration, this is an as-built map showing exactly the condition of the site right after restoration. It shows the areas that we cut, the areas that we filled, the areas that were excavated, the areas, all those little blue circles are pools that we intentionally dug and left for cold water refugia for fish because we've had this massive disturbance, but we wanted to create these pools as our partners have informed, like this is a way you can adaptively manage and do these projects better. So, and then it gives us a baseline of the condition immediately after restoration that we can monitor against going forward. We've started using our drone for our photo point monitoring. Many in here have grants through OWEB and others where you've got to do regular photo point monitoring. So this image on the top is one of our staff members, our drone pilot. He creates these flight plans that in one flight he can take all those red dots are places where he's taking a photo point and in a certain angle, and then he can just repeat that flight. He can go out the next year and do the same thing. And so that's been very valuable for us. These series of photos on the bottom are also a way to show how those photo points tell a story, right? The pre-restoration condition on the left, immediately after restoration in the middle, but then this is the first photo you start to see, after a couple of growing seasons, how there's now those braided channels and vegetation's coming back in, and you see the green as well as the channels developing. Another way we're using drones is just to adaptively manage over time. An example of this is, we've been coming into some of these projects in years after the big heavy equipment have been in there and doing some tweaking and some modifying with beaver dam analogs and pole assisted log structures. And so you can see in this photo on the right, we've pounded in some posts, we've used volunteers to do this work. And then we weave willows within those posts, and we're trying to move some water to parts of the site that maybe the the restoration work didn't go exactly as we'd hoped, and so we're doing some adaptive management that way. But we're using drones. This photo on the left is an image that we've taken with the drone, and it's helping us plan where we're going to place those beaver dam analogs. And so this is some work our staff has done to plan some BDA placement in the next year or two. And so all these structures are just showing where we'd like to install BDAs at that project site. But, without the drone imagery to see like, oh, this is what the site looked like yesterday, now we can start planning for what we want to do tomorrow. That wouldn't be possible unless we were just on the ground. And I'll just preface these next few slides, as the executive director, I'm not leading all this, I'm not on the ground doing this technical work. It takes a whole team, and I've got a slide that recognizes all those folks here at the end. But, some of the technical questions about how some of this work is getting done, I can point you to some of our staff that's leading that work, but I won't have all the details. But one thing we've done is we've contracted with a consultant, Wolfwater Resources. They're out of Portland, to do a land cover classification. This is part of the effectiveness monitoring and showing, how this work has, what's changed pre-restoration to post-restoration. And it helps us monitor things like vegetation change, amount of wood, wetted area, pre and post-restoration. And so what you're seeing, this land cover classification, that image on the left is 2011 pre-restoration. The classification from 2024 is on the right. And, just big picture, there's more green, meaning more riparian vegetation has come in after restoration. There's also more blue, which means there's more water on the landscape. There's more wetted area. And so I'm not going to go into the bar chart, but basically the idea here is that we're just, it resulted in being able to quantify and visualize and better understand the trajectory of upland vegetation versus riparian vegetation, to quantify the large woody debris and the wetted area. And so those bar charts are just showing that at different parts of Whychus Canyon at different projects, and, showing the change in vegetation, the change in wetted area, things like that. So the drone imagery to develop that land cover classification allows us to tell that story. The other thing we've been able to do, using drone imagery and this idea of remote sensing, is to, pre and post restoration classified geomorphic units as a measure of habitat that's been created through the restoration and how it changes over time. For example, we're able to delineate pools and riffles and other geomorphic units. And we did this to assess whether remote sensing is an alternative to land-based surveys, which requires a lot of boots on the ground at a site like this. We had worked with ODFW, and they have AIP surveys where a team of biologists go out and survey these reaches. It takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. So we thought, what could we do with remote sensing to save some of those resources? And so the takeaway here and what you're seeing is these polygons that are not transparent, and I'm tracing that with my laser pointer. That's pre-restoration. That's that single-threaded channel that was incised. All these other polygons that are transparent, that's the post-restoration condition. And the idea here is we have all these new habitat units, a much more complex system over a lot more acres. And so we're really able, with the drone imagery and with the remote sensing, we have had a staff member that's had to go in and digitize all this work, but it's better, or it's different than a team of people, boots on the ground. But we're really able to show, like, the area of pools and riffles pre-restoration compared to post-restoration, just as an example. And so, I would say, to date, we really, there's been some challenges, but very positive in terms of, the value of the remote sensing piece of that work. Another thing I wanted to share was just that and another example of how we're using drones in terms of monitoring. We've contracted with USGS to use drones to collect video, and then USGS was able to complete a very specialized analysis. It's called LSPIV, Large Scale Particle Image Velocimetry. To understand the flow velocities within a restored area. And this is represented, on a very small part of the project in this image here. And so what we're gathering from doing this is, all the green and blue areas that you can see, like at the bottom of the photo and towards the top, those areas are representing flows with a velocity of less than 0.3 meters per second, which is a threshold for optimal rearing habitat for salmonids. Whereas all those arrows that are orange and red and yellow, those are areas with velocities greater than 0.3 meters per second. Those are those faster flowing areas near the thalweg of the channel. But overall, we're showing in this image, a high proportion of velocities that are less than 0.3 meters per second, providing optimal rearing habitat. And so, as we'd hoped, we're creating these different flow of velocities across the restoration area. And that's what we want to see post-restoration. But again, just another example of by partnering with USGS and having this ability to take this video with drones, again, instead of somebody out taking flow measurements over and over and over again across the site, it's a way to streamline this work and just make it more doable. So this is where I switch a little bit and just talk about, how we're conveying some of the imagery and the images from some of these projects. In just recent months, White Cheese Canyon's been impacted by fires and floods. The Flat Fire burned through this part of our watershed in just this past August. It was extremely devastating. 5 homes were lost. Could have also been so much worse without the work of firefighters, and the whole community of sisters was threatened, and so it was bad, but it could have been much worse is how I've been thinking about it. But the ability to capture drone imagery right after the fire was extremely valuable, just to capture the scale of the impacts. The photo on the left, my laser is following White Shoes Creek there. This is the area upstream of what we've restored. It's in that 3-mile reach that we're now, we have plans to restore, but the fire burned all the way down, up and down both slopes across the entire floodplain. After the fire, there was no vegetation that wasn't burned along the creek. So just felt like a complete burn through some of those areas. As opposed to the image on the right, this is part of the 3-mile stretch that we restored. And we've used this a lot, and this is a couple weeks after the burn. You can see all the black, but one of our colleagues, called it a ribbon of green through a sea of black. And it, to me, it's that idea that a picture can speak 1,000 words. Like pretty much everybody that's looked at that, has said, "Oh, wow, look, that green area is like a oasis for, that avoided the devastation of the fire." And so without that image from the drone, we're not able to kind of convey that. And, we've used that image to try and tell the story. We gave it a little bit of time after the fire, but try and tell that story of how the restoration made that area more resilient to the fire and served as a fire break in some ways. The fire burned up the valley, and when it reached the restoration area, it kind of split, and then it came back together after the restored floodplain. But this was a column that we wrote and put in the local Bend Bulletin newspaper, and we've made some efforts to try and tell the story about this investment in restoration and why it's valuable in the face of catastrophic fires. I'd say the other thing is just some random things, like the ability to use the drone to get to places we otherwise wouldn't be able to after a fire. This image on the left was where a golden eagle's nest was. that unfortunately burned up in the fire, but we didn't know. We had done a lot of planning around that eagle's nest related to our restoration in terms of like when we could be near the nest, what time of year we could be there, all those types of things. And so it had been there multiple years. So that nest was lost, which is sad, but also, we're curious to see what the eagles do, where they rebuild. Will they come back to the same place? Will they go somewhere different? The image on the right is a beaver dam that we were super excited about that came in immediately within a year after the restoration in 2023. The fire had jumped. It's a spot fire and it was actually burning on top of the beaver dam. The drone image we were able to see that the beaver dam remained intact. So that made us excited. Hey, it was resilient to the fire. But I would say more than anything, just being able to get our team out safely, to some of these areas after fire is not possible. But with a drone, to be able to go out and fly over and get a sense of what was impacted, what wasn't impacted, what areas along the creek that we planted burned, what areas didn't burn. That's just been extremely useful. Then in December, we had one of the biggest flows on White Shoes Creek we've had in 30 years or more. We don't get these huge floods on White Shoes very often, so the ability to really know, was this one of the top 3 floods in recorded history? We don't know exactly. What we can say is it's one of the biggest flows in the last 30 years. But just having the drone to be able to get out there and capture some imagery to know what was the extent of the flood, and then being able to, I think, adaptively manage again after the floodwaters receded and start some planning in the years ahead related to the floods has been valuable. So I just wanted to provide a few considerations if your organization's thinking about buying a drone. I would say prior to 2020, we didn't use drones very much for our work. Between 2020 and 2024, mostly we were contracting with consultants who we were working with for a variety of reasons, but they often had drones. And so we were consulting with them to use drones. But then in 2024, we purchased our own drone for a couple of reasons. One, we had some available funds. We had some staff that had always wanted to get a drone and try that out ourselves. And so we had those funds, but we also had a newly hired project manager who had a ton of experience with drones. And so that turned out to be super valuable. So, some considerations. One, there, in addition to just the upfront cost of the drone, there can be some real cost year to year in terms of the software and some of the data management that we didn't know that going into the process. But thankfully we were working with a company that is donating some of those software and some of that data management to a nonprofit organization like ours. The other thing I'd say is, do you have somebody that is a drone pilot or someone that is interested and willing to take the time and the resources for your organization to train to get the necessary certifications? Because that's certainly a real thing and requires time. Last thing, and maybe most importantly, is some new federal regulations. The drone that we have is a Chinese product, and so there are new federal rules saying, if you're using federal grant funds, there's some real limitations on how you can use the drone. So I don't personally know if there are American-made drones. There probably are, but if I was purchasing a drone now myself, I'd be looking at those rules and seeing, where is there an American-made or non-Chinese drone that I could buy? We're taking a cautious approach, where we have projects where we're not using federal grants or federal dollars, we're still using the drone. Those projects where we have federal grants, we're talking to our federal grant funders. And, in some cases, we're still using the drone, but we're maybe just only using it for in-house analysis. We're not distributing that drone imagery, anything like that. But we're still navigating and figuring out what that looks like going forward. But it's just a new consideration for those considering a drone. This is a slide just, for those that do this work, it takes a village of partners and funders and supporters. So all of our funders that have supported the restoration and monitoring work are there on the left, and other partners and supporters that contribute in a variety of ways. are listed there on the right. Want to make sure Herb has plenty of time, but just wanted to give thanks to our, I'm delivering the message today, but these folks are the ones doing the work on the ground and in the office. Matthias Pearl there in the blue plaid shirt, he's our restoration program manager. Casey Shooter is our restoration project manager. He's in the red plaid on the left, and he's also our drone pilot. There's a picture of him with our little drone flight pad and getting the drone up in the air on the right. And then Lauren Mork is a huge piece of this work. She's our monitoring program manager that leads all of our monitoring work. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Here's our website. We've got different videos and different reports about some of this work. My email's there. I'd be happy to connect with you or connect you with our staff that are doing this work. So appreciate the opportunity to present today. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, thanks, Chris. That was awesome. Chris and his team are doing really cool stuff. We're going to zoom out a little bit, start talking about satellite imagery. My name is Herb Winters. I'm the district manager for the Gillum SWCD. And yeah, I just want to talk about how we jumped into using satellite imagery for post-fire restoration and some ideas we have moving forward. Right. So I want to talk a little bit about our drone experience and what we learned from that and how that helped us make decisions with acquiring satellite imagery. I'll go over the Lone Rock fire response and how we used satellite imagery to plan both for emergency response stuff, but then more of long-term planning. I'm going to talk about Skywatch, which is a platform that we use to get this data, and then kind of go over some applications, some examples of how we used it, which ultimately led to some funding for our area. So on the map, you can see Gillum County there in the turquoise kind of color, and then the Lone Rock fire footprint is the red there in the corner of the county. So I talked about drones and what we learned from this. Like Chris was talking about, them getting drones in 2024. We did a DEQ 319 grant. This was the only way that I could figure out how to get funding for a drone back in 2020. So we did that. And with that project, we needed to survey 18 stream miles in the Ferry Canyon watershed. That turned out to be a huge task. It took us 2.5 months, 6 field days. We had like 9 batteries, a generator. We're going into really nasty canyons and doing these flights. It just took a long time. We were using a DJI Mavic 2 Pro for this work. And it was one of those things. It was 655 acres, about 300 foot wide floodplain that we were in. But that was quite the task. And so the Lone Rock fire happened in July of 2024. We had 137,000 acres burn, which is about 210 times larger than the area that we surveyed with our drones with that 319 grant. We had lots of landscape scale destruction in this fire, whether it's rangeland, riparian areas, and we really needed to find a way to inventory those impacts. So we started thinking about how the heck are we going to do this? So also in our inventory, we have this little guy, the Wingtra 2, which is a Swiss-made piece of equipment. It's about $40,000. It's really cool. It's a VTOL, which is a vertical takeoff and landing drone. We can do about 400 acres an hour. But we also have to drive out to the project site. We might get 6.5 actual flight hours of doing this. We're also overwhelmed with our fire response. So we couldn't really do a huge amount of inventory. We also had complicated airspace following the fire too. But we remembered our Ferry Canyon experience, and then a colleague of mine, Gus Wathen, mentioned the Skywatch company to me in the past, and I just looked into it thinking that might be a solution. So say like there are other options out there other than Skywatch. This is the one that we used, and it worked out great. But it's basically a clearinghouse for a whole bunch of different satellite companies that are out there where you can purchase your data. So you can basically, I encourage you to just get on the website and check it out. But you click and find an area of interest, and then you can figure out your resolution, kind of figure out what your questions you need to answer with that data is, and then you can kind of fine tune it. But there's no contracts with satellite companies. You can order older data for a cheaper price, or you can task a new data acquisition. In general, the resolutions range from 15 meters to 15 centimeters. It does integrate to ArcGIS Pro. I personally haven't used this, but it seems like a really nice tool where you don't have to actually download TIFFs. It's actually like a web service that just pulls into ArcGIS Pro. So it's really simple. No like mosaicing data sets and things like that. So just an honest account of this. This is just kind of a table outlining what it costs for us. We're about 15 cents an acre for this. We decided to go with a 30 centimeter acquisition with the NEO. This seemed like a sweet spot for us. Some of our major resource concerns right off the bat were these dozer lines where heavy equipment is trying to create fire breaks, fire lines, and they disturb a huge amount of rangeland. And that's a huge resource concern for us moving forward. And also we want to look at the juniper. We have a lot of juniper in our country in this area, and we want to see what burned. But it's about a $20,000 investment. This came out of our general fund. So there wasn't any grants. We were frantically trying to figure out how to help our producers really quickly after this fire. And this was a solution where we thought we could help. And my board made the decision to spend this money. But these are the things I had to show them to kind of make my case. And so I'll just keep on going. One thing I just want to stop here, this was overwhelming for me. Like, it was a frantic time already with the fires going on. And you get into these sites, these platforms, and there's just so much stuff. I wish I could just spend like an hour here and go through all that with you guys, but I want to show all these other things we can do. But like, I'm a drone pilot. I love GIS. I love remote sensing, and it was still tough for me. Just want to be honest with you on that. But there's people out there, these folks at Skywatch really helped me out. They know remote sensing. They ask questions. They're really helpful in our situation. Feel free to call me too and ask questions. I've talked with some of you already about this work. So a little bit more about our story. We ordered the data on August 28th, and we got it on September 9th. So that was quick, right? So then we can really get to work. And that's, we only have 3 people in our office. And so we don't have time to do all these surveys. So if we can order and get this data and start doing inventories faster, I mean, that is money in the bank. So here's just some ideas. This is all back of the napkin kind of math stuff. But like, looking on the left column, we're kind of looking at what it cost us to fly the Fairy Canyon stuff with a drone, right? And 2 people, roughly $80 an hour. This is 40 flights. Now, hypothetically, if we use that fixed wing drone for 137,000 acres, it's like over 50 work days. I put this in here just to show you guys it's not really feasible, right? Like, we can't do this. So it just, at this scale, like, if you need images fast after a catastrophic event, this is kind of the way to do it. And this is just kind of a comparison, just looking at it. And so you might be thinking like, all right, why don't I just wait for the base map to update on whether it's Google Earth or NAIP or the Oregon Statewide Imagery Program, right? Well, they don't update very often, especially if you're in rural areas. Like, it's going to take years to get this stuff. It was kind of interesting. Once we ordered our data, like about a week later, we could actually see like a change in the color of the Google Earth map. So like, I don't know if Google gets our imagery too, if we pay for it. I don't know, but it was on there, like within a week. It's kind of interesting. But the statewide imagery program is super solid. Like, it's 30 centimeters too, and it's good. But you have to wait for it. But that also helped me make the decision, right? I knew that 30 centimeters is kind of what we use all the time for a base map. So I kind of knew that was going to work for our use cases, like with Juniper and dozer lines. So real quick, if you guys want to pull this up, I've just got some imagery on here. Skywatch offers what they call a direct view. You can go into the products that you've purchased and basically create this link, turn it into a QR code here. But this is something you can share with your landowners or your partners, and they can like check it out in real time. Like, what I'm sharing with you guys now is, I'll show it in a second, but it's kind of a riparian area, another acquisition that we used. We had producers that like, I'm really worried about my riparian area. I don't know how it fared in the fire. And we can send this to them, they can check it out. And then also for us, and I'll get to it, this helps with our site visit planning and things like that. So wait a second, folks got it all. I tried it from the back and I had to like zoom in on my camera to make it work, but okay. Yeah, play around with it. That's 30 centimeters. Here we are, dozer lines. First, this is our first application, right? Like we know we need to get grass seed out fast, and we have NRCS emergency equip funding. Now we need to inventory these dozer lines, which in the past, like someone would get in a side by side with a GPS, turn on the tracking, and drive those hundreds of miles of dozer lines. And that takes a lot of time to do that. So we could just get this imagery and map it, and we were able to get contracts out to our landowners super fast by partnering with NRCS and our data. So that was a win for us where we could help our producers when it felt like we couldn't. And I know this is probably hard to see, and I'm sorry, but like the dozer lines are in like the red is kind of where we map, just digitizing manually in ArcMap, and then like creating a buffer, right? Like this is 25 feet on both sides of that line. We can get an area. We can help. That will help with our specifications with our NRCS job sheets. This one use case. Our juniper, same thing. We want to see like what is left, what burned. Now thanks to this imagery, we know that about 75% of the juniper in this watershed burned. Now we have a chance to take this stuff out with funding through OWEB or FEMA or anything else like that. So this really helped us. Otherwise, we were going to have to wait for one of those base maps to update or try to fly priority areas with our fixed wing drone. So this is a resource concern that before the fire was overwhelming. Now it seems manageable. Riparian condition and assessment. This is this is an image from what you guys have on your phone. Thanks. This is rugged country, right? So it's a hard time for us to get into there. And we did our first pass, which is like this NEO imagery for our whole watershed. And the second pass is what you guys are looking at on our phone. And it actually has a couple more multispectral bands, and I'll talk about that in a second. But for this use, we use it to prioritize our site visits. So in the blue polygons there, they might be hard to see, but that's where like we have 22 miles. These are we know that at this confluence, this is where it got hit really hard. We can see it in the imagery. Instead of just surveying the whole thing like we did in Ferry Canyon, we can just buzz out to these spots and check them out and do an assessment. Annual grasses. This is where I'm super excited, and we haven't got super far yet, but our plan is just like Chris was saying, like I'm not an expert in this stuff. We have to find partners to help us. We're going to work with the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center. They're going to kind of help us use this multispectral imagery so we can monitor our annual grass problem in this watershed, because we know it's going to be a huge problem following that fire. So we just have another tool here. The multispectral imagery usually comes as a package with your data, but those are selections you can figure out when you're ordering it. But this is just another tool where we can make these indices that are really helpful and are available to people, and that's, whether you're getting old data, archived data, or new tasking. Oops, I went backwards. So again, we did all this prioritization, we were helping with an emergency response, and through it, we mapped all the things that we need to do for our post-fire restoration work. We were able to put in all this work into a FEMA application. This was an FMAG fire, so we're eligible for that. And so, this is the case. I go to my board, I'm like, you guys gave us $20,000 and we brought back, $1.8 million. And that's not the full story, but that's part of it. It was helpful. Yes. Oh gosh, Alan. I think you guys, it might have been a FMAG fire.
Like soft.
Yes, it has to be, it has some sort of declaration attached to it. Yeah. I can't recall. Sorry. So these are just kind of the treatments, and this is an example map that we included with our grant application of like our annual grasses, right? We know that these are the areas that we need to hit. These is the acres that we have inventoried using satellite imagery. You know, we have some other stuff going on, virtual fence and things like that. We can look, the biomass removal is just big trees that we know that are big, dead, standing. We need to get them out of the way for various reasons. So again, full cycle. So I'm running a little long, so I'm going to hustle. So yeah, getting the image, data acquisition, boom. Then we're going to do our inventory. We're going to prioritize, write our grants, get funded, and then implement. And then we can use this technology too for monitoring, like a whole session or track could be on using this for monitoring. But it's accessible, right? You guys can get your hands on it. So again, you know, kind of like what Chris was talking with the drones, like it's really like what he's doing, you know, you need a microscope, right? You need to be looking really tight into those things. But for like landscape scale stuff, we don't need it. Will it get there eventually? I hope so. I hope someday that we have, you know, centimeter level resolution on satellite imagery. It's going to save everybody a lot of time and money. And I think we'll get there someday. But anyways, this is just a little comparison on that. And then wrapping things up, you know, match a tool for your scale of your problem. That satellite imagery is accessible and it can seem overwhelming, but you know, like I said, my contact info's here. Let me know if you want to check it out. You know, look at all the other providers. Don't have to go with Skywatch, but check them out and check out all those ones and give me a call if you have questions. But you don't need a GIS department. You know, you can get this in and start working with it. But the learning curve is real and but it's manageable. So that's it. Thank you, everybody.
We got 10 minutes for questions for both Chris and Herb. And also, you know, if you guys want any suggestions for OLEV to help kind of continuing convening the activities outside of Connect, so fire away.
You said the fire split around the restoration project. Did you imagine that if that had continued for the whole length of the system, that might have actually been buffered? The fire, could it have stopped the fire from spreading?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, and yeah, I feel like if it was coming perpendicular to, you know, the floodplain that we restored, it could have served as that buffer, but the fire was coming from downstream up the canyon, and you know, that's just how the wind was blowing it. And then when it came to the restored area, it split and went on both sides, and then came back together after that 3 miles. And that's, you know, that image I showed where it completely burned through, that was actually upstream after it came back together. So, you know, I think in some circumstances it could serve as a fire break. In this case, it just split and went around it. Yep.
Chris. Right. The station in 2011, what would have been used for that? Would you?
I'd have to get back to you on that, just because I wasn't managing that project myself, and just I don't know if we had pre-existing drone imagery or if that was you know, some sort of satellite imagery that was used, but yeah, but I can sure follow up with you. Yeah.
Well, now that y'all have some experience working on the ground with them during the iteration, which you could have made during that initial process, any lessons learned, but like share.
I mean, I think for me, it was that slide that I had considerations, you know, just, you know, if, you know, I'd look at all the different drone options, you know, and related to the federal rules now, you know, see what's available, think about it that way. You know, those costs in terms of software and data management are real. You know, they can be close to $1,000 a year in some cases. So that is something we didn't consider. So, and like I said, we found a way to offset that, but that was something that's certainly real. And just from my perspective as manager, I didn't necessarily know how much time would be required for a staff person to just get the certifications, do the test, do the studying to take the test, all that requires time that I think I maybe thought, yeah, that's probably the case, but didn't consider how much time.
And I guess, are there anybody that works for an American drone company here?
Are there any?
Yeah, so like, um, anyways, like, unfortunately, like they're behind, right? Like we are gonna have to be using them, but they cost twice as much and work half as good. So that's a problem, and that's just my opinion on it. But like we're trying to find the best American drone that we can, made drone that we can use right now, and they aren't as good as the Chinese products. But that I think that'll just take time and it'll get better. But yeah, thinking about like your use case really is like how long do you have to be out in the field? Like how much area do you have to cover? Are you going to have internet access? Those are big questions that you need to ask. Like we have uh, as many batteries as we can afford. We have generators, we have Starlink, we have like the whole thing because when you go out in the middle of nowhere and things go sideways, you don't want to have to go all the way back to the office and start over. So.
One of the things that I'll just share from a lot of our monitoring grantees that acquire drones or hire consultants to collect drone imagery is the time to process the imagery once you get in the office. And especially if you're going to be using it to quantify change associated with restoration actions. Some of the lessons learned that I've seen across many organizations is, what's that workflow look like? And what are the metrics you're going to extract from the imagery to detect change over time? And that the learning curve and that workflow is steep amongst many organizations. And trying to standardize what that looks like. There are some sort of protocols coming out that I think will be useful guides for folks who are starting to work on this. Did you had a question?
And so on the federal rules for American made, is that only for drones or does it extend to other things that are used by conservation districts, like cell phones?
I think
As far as I know, it's just drones.
And you see in the future of, the most efficient way to use funding and any pushback on that, because that wasn't, I think that's a new rule. I understand it, but really all of it's going to change that. So, point, but you see any progress of looking at the efficiency and stuff like that versus just.
Yeah, I don't know if I have, we're trying to figure out how to navigate it, right? And we're asking our federal funders like how they're interpreting the rule and the law. And honestly, we're getting some varying levels of feedback. And so we're just kind of learning as we go and trying to figure it out as we go. And I don't know, I'd be curious if Herb has another answer to that or different or more.
No, we're in the same boat as Chris, just kind of trying to wade through it, not screw up. So,
I mean, the one thing that we did say, so like the monitoring grants that OEB funds, those are state funds. The law does not apply to state funds. So just something to help clarify or make it even more confusing. I'm not sure. Go ahead, Cyrus.
Yeah, I heard. So you got this on your bottom. Are you left to manage that big data? And then in your like analysis mode, are there tools that come along with that, to, like identify those dozer scar lines, or is that one of y'all just sitting there clicking?
yeah, like right now, how we did it, and in crunch time, it's all manual. But there's way to there are ways to automate this. I don't know about the dozer lines. I bet you could, but just image classification, is a way to kind of streamline some of that stuff. I don't have the expertise in that to really talk to it, but like Chris was talking with like the vegetation classifications, like you can do the same thing with satellite imagery. You just have to know that the resolution isn't as good. That's one thing I forgot to mention is that the multispectral imagery is typically is not as detailed. Instead of like 30 centimeters, you're looking at like 1.2 meters on that when you're talking about satellite stuff. But and then the data, yes, it's huge files, but some of the older data, 2024 data that we got, like it's downloaded as TIFFs, but like that direct view that I shared with you guys, like they're moving more toward the web service kind of access. So it's not actually a hard file on your computer.
Go ahead.
I kind of think this idea, I think this would be a great topic for technology learning exchange at some point. That we collectively put together some best practices and tips and tricks and how it seems like there's a lot of people who are figuring this out. It'd be great to kind of get that knowledge widely disseminated.
Yeah, no, appreciate that suggestion. Thank you. And then was there a question in the back? Maybe we have time for one more.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not an expert on it. I know like the indices is probably like really like an easy thing I think for folks to do. But I believe that those bands are all there. So like the data is there to manipulate and show you what you need. I'm just not the one to tell you how to do it.
Then with other partners working with multi-spec for VED, and we're out of time, so I'll wrap it up. Is that you have to know what that unique signature is for that plant. So you have to do that ground truth. But once you kind of associate that color with that plant, then you can apply it. Yeah. But just thank you so much, you guys, for all the questions and your attention, and thanks, Zach, for moderating. Appreciate it.